Realize this: nobody thinks about your life more than you do. There is a silence before the turning, a stillness before the moment breaks. There comes a moment when you finally understand: no one is coming to lift you out of the life you have outgrown. Not because the world has turned against you, but because everyone is carrying the weight of their own survival. This truth removes illusion. It ends the waiting. It ends the search for someone else to move you forward, and something inside you begins to quiet. Silence was never abandonment. It was exposure, revealing the exact place where your strength must be built, where you finally confront yourself without interruption. No audience, no witnesses, no rescue. The world teaches you to chase recognition. Stoicism teaches you to become undeniable without it. When nobody cares, you are free to become someone unstoppable. When nobody carries you, you learn to generate your own momentum. When nobody is watching, discipline becomes identity. Self-mastery begins in the space where applause goes silent and self-command takes its first breath. And once you understand that no one is coming, you do not wait for life to open a path. You cut one. The silence becomes fuel. The lack of observers becomes freedom. Strength stops being something you seek and becomes something you step into. This is where the ascent begins. Slow at first, then inevitable. This is where you start to rise by your own hand. You are done waiting for strength. You begin building from it. And once you begin, there is no going back. The ascent does not wait for comfort. And from here, the work is no longer about being noticed. It is about becoming the one who can rise without witnesses. This is the discipline of becoming untouchable. And you rise. The reality that nobody cares is a direct lesson in responsibility and personal agency. It is the principle that shields the mind from unnecessary comparison, noise, and emotional dependency on outside validation. It is a reminder that most of what a person expects from the world is a projection of unmet internal discipline. When you accept that nobody is coming to rescue you, the mind becomes lighter, and the path forward becomes clearer. The Stoics taught that human beings carry the duty to govern their inner world. The world is busy with its own burdens. People are more focused on themselves than on you. This truth is not cruel. It is liberating because it returns control to where it always belonged. The modern world teaches people to seek attention as proof of importance. The Stoics taught the opposite. The individual grows stronger when he no longer needs the crowd to confirm his direction. When you no longer wait for applause, you create faster. When you stop hoping to be understood, you protect your energy. When you stop explaining yourself, you preserve your dignity. This is the foundation of focusing on yourself. The private commitments you keep are more valuable than public praise. Stoic practice begins with self-governance. The idea that you must strengthen what is in your control and loosen your grip on what is outside your control. The expectation that others will care about your goals the way you do will always fail. People are invested in themselves. They see your success only when it is visible. They rarely see the hours of discipline behind it. They do not witness your restraint, your self-directed study, or your deliberate rejection of weakness. They only react to the result. Expecting others to care about the process leads to bitterness. Accepting that the burden is yours leads to momentum. The inner shift begins when you stop waiting to be noticed. A Stoic does not ask for acknowledgement. A Stoic commits to the work because the work is the reward. Growth does not require witnesses. Progress does not require applause. The individual who grasps this principle becomes untouchable by distraction. He becomes difficult to discourage. He does not collapse when others dismiss him. He is anchored by purpose, not attention. Life today encourages comparison. Social media has turned visibility into a form of currency. People think they need constant recognition to feel real. This is why so many become anxious and resentful. They tie their worth to how often others notice them. The Stoics taught that external perception cannot establish worth. Your worth is linked to your conduct. Your identity is shaped by the habits you carry in silence. Progress becomes consistent when you detach from spectators. When you understand that nobody cares, you stop performing. You begin to live with precision and focus. You stop seeking sympathy and begin seeking strength. This is the turning point where self-respect grows. Personal discipline becomes a private standard. You no longer need witnesses for your integrity. You no longer hold conversations about what you will someday do. You create evidence through consistent daily action. This mindset also protects your energy. People often drain themselves trying to justify their plans to others. They explain their goals to people who lack commitment. They seek alignment from those who have never built anything. They tolerate judgment from people who only observe. The Stoic path removes this burden. If the work is aligned with reason and virtue, no explanation is required. Most setbacks are emotional rather than practical. People get delayed because they are watching how others react to their choices. They wait for permission they will never receive. They expect enthusiasm from people who are passive in their own lives. The moment you stop waiting for approval, discipline becomes easier. You no longer negotiate with your lower self. You no longer delay because someone else seems indifferent. You no longer measure progress against outside expectations. Self-reliance begins as a mental posture. You stop expecting others to carry emotional weight that belongs to you. You become intentional with your attention. You invest energy only in what produces growth. The person who accepts that nobody cares is no longer distracted by complaint or self-pity. He becomes a problem solver. He no longer seeks comfort through validation. He seeks peace through action. The Stoics taught that control of thought is the root of freedom. When you repeatedly look outward for affirmation, you weaken your stability. When you cultivate indifference to outside opinion, you restore your inner authority. The person who no longer needs attention cannot be manipulated by neglect. He is steady, regardless of who notices him. The message also removes excuses. Once you accept that the world is not watching you, there is no reason to delay your development. Nothing is holding you back, except your own hesitation. There is no audience waiting for your next move. This is the cleanest form of freedom. You are free from the weight of expectation. You act out of alignment with your principles rather than fear of judgment. The discipline of focusing on yourself requires inner silence. You train your attention to stay rooted in what is necessary. You cut out emotional inflation. You stop seeking acknowledgement for the simplest acts. You become a craftsman of your character instead of a performer for the public. When your standard is private excellence, outer noise loses influence. A person who lives for external validation is always unstable. Their mood swings with attention. Their direction shifts with praise. Their identity collapses when ignored. The Stoic path teaches self-possession. You learn to generate your own stability. You learn to govern your speech, manage your desires, and regulate your focus. You learn to honor your commitments without witnesses. When you stop expecting care from the outside world, disappointment shrinks. You accept the natural self-interest of others. People are busy protecting their own comfort, chasing their own goals, dealing with their own burdens. This is natural. The mistake is expecting anyone to consistently carry your emotional load. Once you accept this, you become stronger. You do what is required because it is required. The solution to frustration is internal clarity. Expectations create tension. Responsibility clears it. When you carry your own weight, you feel lighter. You no longer wait. You no longer delay. You no longer talk yourself out of action. You rise each day understanding that your future is built in the dark, when no one is watching. Self-focus is the root of progress. You do not grow through attention. You grow through repetition, refinement, and restraint. You do not build by talking. You build by carrying out the daily work without needing spectators. The Stoics understood that personal excellence is private long before it is visible. The athlete trains before the crowd arrives. The mind must be built before recognition enters the picture. This principle also dissolves resentment. You stop keeping score. You no longer obsess about who supports you and who ignores you. When you are centered inside your duty, support becomes a bonus rather than a requirement. You move forward with or without applause. You become unfazed by whether anyone notices your effort. You begin to treat your duty as a personal contract. Marcus Aurelius wrote that it is enough to do the right thing and leave the outcome to nature. This posture frees the mind from theatrical living. Attention becomes irrelevant when purpose is intact. The modern environment rewards exposure rather than substance. Many people obsess over visibility and neglect the work that visibility is supposed to represent. The Stoic path reverses this. The goal is excellence before exposure. The goal is mastery before recognition. When you accept that nobody is concerned with your process, you stop performing and start building. You stop broadcasting intention and begin delivering results. There is a quiet strength in self-direction. You no longer negotiate with laziness or hesitation. You build structure where your past self made excuses. Seneca wrote that the man who governs himself is free in every city. This freedom is earned through discipline. When you remove the need for external reinforcement, your progress becomes consistent because it no longer depends on anyone else's enthusiasm. Hybrid intensity means clarity without emotional softness. The message honors reason while still delivering the weight of personal duty. The Stoics did not flatter weakness. They trained the mind to confront reality without panic and without fantasy. Self-focus is not isolation. It is self-respect. It is the return of responsibility to its proper owner. Modern culture encourages people to outsource responsibility for their suffering. This creates emotional dependence. People wait for support before they begin. They wait for ideal conditions before they commit. They wait for encouragement before they take a single step. A Stoic begins before there is applause. A Stoic acts before there is recognition. The proof of seriousness is movement. When you release the illusion that others must care, a new level of internal strength appears. Silence becomes productive. Solitude becomes reinforcing. You begin to cultivate a private authority that stabilizes you against criticism and neglect. You become less reactive, less dramatic, and harder to discourage. Seneca taught that the wise person stands self-supported. This does not mean isolation, it means foundation. You do not collapse just because the crowd is indifferent. You do not withdraw from your duty because attention is scarce. Purpose replaces approval as the engine of daily action. Social platforms have conditioned people to believe that their life only matters when someone is watching. This is the root of insecurity for many adults today. It is the reason so many bright individuals remain paralyzed. They measure progress through attention rather than skill. They treat visibility as proof of value. They obsess over engagement instead of growth. The Stoic rejects this structure. Value is created in silence. Growth takes place outside the view of spectators. The result is revealed only after mastery has matured. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the reward of a good deed is to have done it. This principle dismantles the craving for acknowledgement. You learn to work cleanly, quietly, and consistently. A person who focuses on themselves does not compete with noise. They lift their standard. They protect their schedule. They reduce meaningless interactions. They guard their state of mind. They learn to become comfortable with being unseen during the building phase. Visibility is a byproduct rather than the objective. A core Stoic discipline is detachment from outcomes that depend on others. This includes validation, recognition, gratitude, and reassurance. When your emotional state depends on these external inputs, your stability collapses whenever they are withheld. When you detach from them, you regain inner command. Many people do not improve because they are still secretly waiting to be rescued. They wait for someone to notice their potential. They wait to be invited, chosen, encouraged, or carried. The Stoic path removes these fantasies. No one is obligated to care. The world is not waiting for your success story. The load must be carried by you. This reality is not harsh when fully understood. It is clarity. It places your power back in your hands. When there is no audience to impress, excuses lose traction. When there is no expectation of help, work begins sooner. When there is no fantasy of support, discipline grows. Epictetus taught that learning to govern desire and impulse is the highest form of liberation. Approval is a desire. Validation is a desire. Recognition is a desire. These desires create emotional turbulence. Letting them go produces psychological strength. You become anchored in principle rather than praise. Self-focus also sharpens judgment. You become selective with what earns your attention. You no longer indulge gossip, trivial conflicts, or the emotional storms of undisciplined people. You reserve energy for what increases competence, clarity, and character. This is how a Stoic guards their inner citadel. People often misunderstand self-focus as selfishness. It is the opposite. When you focus on yourself, you become a stable and capable person. You are less dependent, less fragile, and less draining to others. You relieve the world of the responsibility to carry your emotional weight. This is contribution through autonomy. This mindset reshapes how you move through life. You execute daily habits that strengthen the mind and the body. You honor structure. You commit to reason instead of impulse. You separate noise from necessity. A person who lives this way becomes trusted because they do not collapse under pressure. Progress is built through repetition without witnesses. That is where real transformation takes form. The individual who accepts that nobody cares stops negotiating with comfort. They get up earlier. They train consistently. They study with intention. They refine their speech. They regulate their habits. They remove internal excuses before they attempt to remove external obstacles. A balanced approach allows the message to stay firm without hostility. The Stoics aimed to elevate the mind, not to humiliate it. They exposed weakness only to correct it. They confronted illusion so that discipline could replace it. This style keeps the lecture grounded in reason while still pressing the listener toward higher standards. Modern life trains people to posture instead of develop skill. It teaches presentation before mastery. People learn to curate identity rather than build it. They focus on appearing consistent rather than being consistent. They use language of transformation while maintaining habits that sabotage it. This gap creates silent misery. Stoicism closes the gap by demanding proof through conduct. Self-focus in the Stoic sense means returning energy to the inner structure. You invest in your capacity to think clearly, to withstand discomfort, to manage emotion, and to carry duty without praise. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the obstacle becomes the way. That principle applies to emotional reliance as well. The obstacle is attachment to external reinforcement. The way is detachment through discipline. When nobody is expected to care, the ego loses its stage. The work stops being a performance. You no longer need to advertise effort. You no longer require witnesses to validate sacrifice. You no longer leak energy explaining yourself. Silence becomes strength. Direction becomes private. The mission becomes internal. A person who maintains external dependency stays psychologically weak. They cannot persist without reassurance. They adjust their effort based on attention. They rise and fall with the mood of spectators. This is why many intelligent adults remain emotionally undeveloped. Their worth is still rented from public perception rather than earned through self-governance. Stoicism teaches internal sufficiency. Epictetus reminded his students that the only true freedom is mastery of the self. When your sense of worth is self-generated, neglect does not damage you. When your motivation is sourced from duty, applause becomes irrelevant. This creates a durable mind that does not collapse under isolation or indifference. Modern culture presents self-focus as selfishness because dependency benefits the system. A dependent person is easy to direct, easy to influence, and easy to distract. A self-governed person is difficult to manipulate. They are not pulled by opinion or emotional bait. They live from principle instead of reaction. They are anchored in reason rather than social approval. Focusing on yourself means you care more about building capacity than building an audience. You care more about strengthening character than curating an image. You pursue mastery instead of attention. You choose structure over display. You withdraw energy from appearances and reinvest it in execution. Seneca wrote that a person is unhappy when they depend on others for happiness. This applies to validation as much as material favors. The moment your emotional stability is leased to the opinions of strangers, you no longer own your life. Self-focus reclaims ownership. It restores interior sovereignty. When you stop expecting the world to care, you begin training for self-respect. You build systems, you refine habits, you eliminate noise, you show up for the work without negotiation. Consistency stops being a wish and becomes a rhythm. The private foundation becomes unshakable, which is why public outcomes eventually take form. People fall into stagnation when they confuse being seen with being significant. Visibility is not progress. Talk is not development. Recognition is not competence. The Stoics separated doing from displaying. They chose substance first. They built in obscurity until their nature carried evidence of discipline. This posture creates mental peace. When you are not chasing acknowledgement, the mind stays quiet. There is no inner courtroom demanding approval. There is no emotional exhaustion from trying to be understood. There is no resentful wait for someone to notice your effort. You move in alignment with reason and duty, which is the purest form of freedom. Self-focus also resets your relationship with ambition. You stop trying to dominate outcomes you cannot control. You focus entirely on input, your conduct, your choices, your habits, your effort. The outer result arrives as consequence, not conquest. The Stoics called this living according to nature, conforming conduct to what is within your control. The more you internalize that nobody cares, the more committed you become to personal rigor. You give yourself structure, you track your energy, you remove indulgences that weaken your mind, you sharpen attention, you stop seeking emotional relief from distraction and begin seeking strength from discipline. Growth requires repetition without recognition. That is the test. That is where identity reshapes itself. When applause arrives, the work is already complete. This is why Stoic development is silent. The mind is strengthened in the dark, not in the spotlight. A person who focuses on themselves becomes consistent because there is no one to perform for. Consistency becomes identity rather than performance. It becomes automatic. It becomes expected. This is what the Stoics mean by character. Character is what you repeat in the absence of spectators. This approach also eliminates excuses. Once you accept that nobody is obligated to care about your goals, there is no reason to delay. There is no one to impress, which means there is nothing to wait for. Life becomes action rather than anticipation. Direction becomes internal rather than negotiated. Self-focus is not withdrawal from responsibility. It is the foundation of responsibility. You cannot serve, lead, build, or endure without personal stability. The person who cannot stand alone cannot be relied upon by others. The Stoics taught service through strength, not dependency. When you stop chasing external affirmation, you gain the bandwidth to develop mastery. Mastery requires solitude, repetition, correction, and focus. These conditions do not attract spectators. This is why few achieve excellence. They abandon the path the moment recognition is delayed. Controlled intensity reflects how a disciplined mind corrects itself. The tone is direct because clarity is a duty. The correction is grounded in reason rather than emotion. Stoicism teaches that the adult who carries responsibility cannot negotiate with weakness. He must face it with composure, identify it without denial, and replace it with structure. Modern adults often remain trapped in cycles of stagnation because they refuse to confront themselves with honesty. They want growth without discomfort. They want confidence without discipline. They want praise without proof. A Stoic dismantles this illusion. Self-respect is earned through self-command. Discipline is a form of loyalty to oneself. Without it, ambition becomes fantasy. Focusing on yourself is a daily decision to govern your mind before the world influences it. It is a decision to be the cause rather than the echo. It is a decision to live by intention instead of drift. The person who chooses internal command no longer waits for conditions to improve. They improve the conditions through conduct. Marcus Aurelius wrote that wasting life occurs when a person loses control of their mind. This is why the Stoics considered self-governance the highest form of preparation. When you rule your inner life, the outer world no longer destabilizes you. When you commit to your own standard, inconsistency from others does not derail you. Accountability in Stoicism is not punishment. It is alignment. It is the act of closing the distance between what you claim to value and what you actually practice. You do not shame yourself. You correct yourself. You course adjust without self-pity. When nobody cares, excuses dissolve. There is no one to convince. There is no one to impress. There is no audience to perform for. What remains is the work itself. What remains is the truth of your habits. Attention cannot replace repetition. A reputation cannot replace discipline. Talk cannot replace execution. Self-focus sharpens discipline because it stops the leakage of attention. Energy, once wasted on external perception, is redirected toward personal refinement. You begin to notice how much time is lost to distraction, resentment, or comparison. You begin to protect your mental field the way a soldier protects a perimeter. Each wasted minute becomes visible. Each undisciplined impulse becomes recognizable. This awareness is the first stage of command. A person who accepts that nobody cares becomes immune to emotional bargaining. They do not soften their standards to avoid discomfort. They do not collapse into excuses. They do not look for shortcuts. They understand that the world does not reward intention. it rewards consistency. This mindset also shields you from jealousy and comparison. If no one is responsible for your progress, then no one is competition. You realize you are not behind anyone. You are only behind your own potential. The comparison dissolves because the path is internal, not external. Seneca wrote that the greatest obstacle to living is expectation. People expect others to lift them, encourage them, believe in them, or stay beside them. This expectation becomes a chain. The moment it is broken, they feel abandoned. The Stoic avoids this trap by grounding his stability in his own conduct. Self-focus requires protecting your internal state with the same seriousness you would protect your livelihood. What you repeatedly think becomes your direction. What you tolerate becomes your standard. What you delay becomes your new limit. This is why the Stoics treated thought as the root of all discipline. The person who masters attention masters conduct. The person who masters conduct masters life. When you focus on yourself, you train this cycle into motion. You learn to intervene before your impulses hijack your day. You learn to choose structure when the mind seeks escape. You learn to sustain effort without witnesses. This is where strength becomes visible in behavior. When others quit, you continue. When others react, you regulate. When others externalize blame, you examine your role. When others look outward, you return inward. That is Stoic leadership. It is leadership of the self before leadership of the world. A disciplined person becomes stable because they do not need external reinforcement to maintain direction. Their schedule does not shift with mood. Their commitment does not shrink under silence. Their principles do not collapse under isolation. They carry themselves the same way in darkness as they do in daylight. This is the practical meaning of focus. You become someone who can be relied upon by yourself. You do what you said you would do, not because anyone is watching, but because your word holds weight in your own mind. This is the foundation of self-trust. Self-trust is the rarest form of confidence. It cannot be borrowed, it cannot be gifted, it cannot be imitated. It is forged through private repetition. The Stoics understood that once a person trusts themselves, external validation loses influence. Approval becomes irrelevant. Recognition becomes incidental. Your identity is carried by what you practice. A hybrid application style reinforces philosophy through lived practice. Stoicism was never intended as abstract thought. It is a training discipline. The mind must be shaped through drill and reinforcement, the same way the body is shaped through repetition. Wisdom becomes real only when it becomes embodied. Practices are not rituals for display. They are internal fortifications. They condition attention, sharpen discipline, and cleanse the mind of dependency. When these routines are integrated, self-focus becomes automatic instead of effortful. The daily execution installs strength into identity. One practical application of this principle is morning command of thought. Before the external world enters your awareness, you decide your posture for the day. Marcus Aurelius began his mornings by reminding himself that the world contains disorder, pettiness, distraction, and emotional chaos, yet none of it has authority over his mind unless invited. Beginning the day with this mental anchoring prevents you from outsourcing control. Another practice is withdrawal from performance. This means doing the work without broadcasting it. Each time you refrain from announcing effort, you train your identity to value discipline over attention. This rewires the reward system. The reward becomes execution itself, not acknowledgement. A third practice is accountability in silence. Before blaming external conditions, you examine your own conduct with clarity. If effort is inconsistent, you correct it. If attention is scattered, you restrain it. If desire is impulsive, you direct it. You solve the internal cause rather than dramatizing the external condition. Controlled intensity means you do not soothe yourself with soft language. You meet your current level with honesty. If you are undisciplined, you name it. If you are inconsistent, you correct it. If you are easily discouraged, you strengthen tolerance instead of seeking comfort. This is how Stoic improvement functions. Internal reform precedes external results. This mindset also upgrades your relationship with pressure. When nobody is expected to care, responsibility becomes proportionate. Pressure is no longer viewed as unfair. It is recognized as part of the human assignment. A Stoic does not wait to feel ready. They train readiness by acting under imperfect conditions. Self-focus also requires boundary with distraction. Modern life is engineered to scatter attention. A person who does not control intake cannot control thought. A person who does not control thought cannot control direction. This is why self-focus begins with deliberate limitation of external noise. You are not denying the world. You are prioritizing command of yourself before interacting with it. Seneca wrote that life is long if you know how to use it. Time is not scarce. Discipline is scarce. Focus is scarce. Restraint is scarce. The adult who learns to govern these resources becomes rare, not because the path is secret, but because few are willing to build without applause. When your mind no longer feeds on external validation, energy becomes available for progress. You begin to notice changes in posture, attention, and internal stability. You walk differently because you are no longer seeking to be seen. You work differently because you are no longer fueled by approval. You speak differently because you are no longer performing. Your identity becomes grounded instead of floating. A person who focuses on themselves also protects their environment. They curate who has access to their attention. They reduce conversations that weaken focus. They stop explaining their goals to uncommitted people. They no longer seek emotional understanding from those who have never practiced discipline themselves. This is the point where dignity begins to emerge. When you rely on yourself for momentum, you become someone you respect. Self-respect is the foundation of all confidence. Confidence is not loud. It is quiet certainty born from evidence. Evidence is repetition. Repetition is discipline. These traits are inaccessible to the person who still seeks validation from spectators. In the modern world, most people collapse because their emotional reference point is external. They feel strong when praised and invisible when ignored. A Stoic remains steady under both. They understand that silence is part of training. They do not demand recognition. They outgrow the desire for it. From this posture, setbacks lose power. If nobody is expected to care, defeat carries no humiliation. There is no audience to disappoint. There is only refinement. The Stoic uses every difficulty as material. Marcus Aurelius called this the art of turning obstacles into fuel. This applies not only to external hardship, but also to emotional detachment from recognition. Self-focus also heightens discipline of speech. You conserve language. You speak with purpose rather than impulse. You no longer broadcast plans. You protect direction until the result is matured. This preserves energy and conserves momentum. A silent plan develops without sabotage. The more you reclaim authority over your state, the less reactive you become. People who still rely on attention must constantly monitor how they are perceived. This drains cognitive resources. A Stoic withdraws from that economy entirely. They are no longer purchasing worth through recognition. They already own it through character. This interior shift is the beginning of real autonomy. You start to experience life as something you engage with, not something you are waiting to be lifted by. You build patience, you build tolerance, you build endurance. You construct a personal standard that is immune to neglect. Others cannot weaken what they did not build. Emotional detachment in Stoicism is not indifference to life. It is independence from emotional dependency. It is the ability to remain in command of your internal state when external conditions fluctuate. The person who depends on others to feel valued is always unstable. The person who draws stability from inner governance cannot be thrown off course by neglect or misunderstanding. Most emotional suffering in adulthood comes from misplaced expectation. People assume others should validate them, notice their growth, celebrate their effort, or comfort their struggle. When reality does not match these expectations, resentment forms. The Stoic dissolves this trap by recognizing that others are preoccupied with their own burdens. Expecting constant care is misalignment with human nature. Marcus Aurelius wrote that each person lives only in the present moment and carries only their own mind. This means no one is walking through your life with the same focus that you carry. When you internalize this, disappointment lifts. You stop waiting for emotional reinforcement. You begin to generate your own. Emotional detachment is a form of strength training. It teaches the mind to stand without leaning. It removes the belief that someone else must co-sign your progress to make it real. You do not feel overlooked because you are no longer seeking to be seen. You feel anchored because your reference point is internal. This posture protects dignity. When you are no longer swayed by neglect or recognition, you become consistent. You do not shrink in silence, and you do not inflate in praise. You hold your equilibrium. This steadiness is the essence of Stoic composure. The first step in emotional detachment is noticing where you still depend on external acknowledgement. Each time your effort feels weakened by someone's indifference, that is a sign of reliance. Each time you feel the urge to prove yourself to be understood, that is a sign of emotional leakage. Each time disappointment shifts your motivation, it reveals attachment. The Stoic response is inward correction. You do not chase reassurance. You restore discipline. You bring attention back to conduct rather than perception. You ask, am I aligned with my duty? Is my effort honest? Is my standard intact? If those answers are yes, then no external opinion has relevance. Seneca taught that tranquility is achieved by withdrawing value from things outside our command. Emotional detachment applies this teaching to the realm of approval. When you no longer assign emotional value to validation, neglect loses its sting. You are no longer wounded by what is absent. Another aspect of detachment is neutrality toward misunderstanding. Many adults waste enormous energy trying to correct how they are perceived. They defend, justify, explain, and persuade. A Stoic does not chase perception. He understands that judgment belongs to others and conduct belongs to him. Misinterpretation becomes irrelevant when your sense of self is rooted internally. This does not produce coldness. It produces clarity. You still care about virtue, duty, and contribution, but you no longer depend on emotional response from others. You give without the expectation of recognition. You act without the demand of praise. You advance without the need for witnesses. When emotional detachment takes root, rejection loses psychological power. The adult mind recognizes that rejection is simply misalignment of path or values, not an attack on worth. You do not collapse under it. You move through it. You remain centered. This is freedom from emotional volatility. Modern culture treats external acknowledgement as emotional oxygen. Stoicism breaks this dependency by teaching inner sufficiency. You learn that you can generate your own stability. You learn that your worth is independent of being seen. You learn that silence is not absence, it is space for discipline. A person who has cultivated detachment becomes resilient by design. Praise does not inflate them. Neglect does not weaken them. Criticism does not unseat them. Their mind is not held hostage by reaction. They are self-directed and self-owned. This interior strength is what allows deeper discipline to form later. A mind that is no longer dependent is a mind capable of sustained growth. Without emotional detachment, every advance is fragile. With it, growth becomes durable. A Stoic approach to emotional dependency is correction without hostility. The message is firm because truth must be stable, yet it carries no contempt. Dependency is recognized as a habit of thought, not a permanent flaw. It is a condition that is unlearned through discipline and interior strengthening. Many adults still operate with the emotional architecture of adolescence. They feel unnoticed and interpret that feeling as injury. They mistake neglect for injustice. They believe that being unseen is a statement about their worth. This belief creates fragility. The Stoic dissolves this fragility by returning responsibility to its rightful owner, the self. Growth begins when you stop expecting others to supply your emotional foundation. When you understand that no one is coming to reinforce your identity, you begin building one you can rely on. This is the psychological crossing point between dependence and authorship. You shift from consumer of validation to producer of direction. Emotional maturity means governing your state without audience. It means you do not rise because someone praises you, and you do not fall because someone ignores you. You move from principle, not permission. You advance because the work must be done. This is why the Stoics repeatedly trained detachment. If your motivation can be taken away by another person's indifference, then it was never yours. Self-governance ensures that effort is self-sustained. You carry your drive internally rather than renting it from external recognition. Detachment also prepares the mind for solitude, and solitude is where identity stabilizes. In silence, you see what you truly believe. In quiet, you hear your own excuses. In absence of noise, you confront your discipline. Most people fear this confrontation, which is why they cling to external stimulation. A Stoic uses solitude as training ground. Modern conditions make detachment more necessary than ever. The world is saturated with manufactured significance, likes, reactions, commentary, empty feedback loops. These systems reward the appearance of relevance rather than the cultivation of strength. Without detachment, the mind becomes addicted to being seen rather than becoming capable. When detachment is practiced long enough, neutrality becomes your default. You no longer internalize the emotional energy of others. You do not measure yourself through their response. You do not chase reassurance. You do not interpret silence as rejection. You remain centered in self-authorship. This is the psychological prerequisite for discipline. Discipline is difficult for the emotionally dependent because they still require encouragement to continue. The Stoic removes this requirement. Continuation is evidence of inner command, not emotional reinforcement. You persist because your nature has become structured. Once emotional dependency is dissolved, the individual becomes capable of durable focus. The mind is no longer leaking strength through insecurity. Energy is preserved. Willpower thickens. Identity becomes earned through conduct. This is the stage where discipline is no longer a task, but a natural extension of who you have become. Discipline as progressive tightening follows the natural rhythm of Stoic development. First, the mind is anchored in silence, then it is shaped through repetition, then it is hardened through standard. Soft repetition becomes strict identity. What begins as effort matures into nature. The Stoics understood that discipline is not a single act. It is a sequence of internal reinforcement. In the beginning, the mind resists structure because it is accustomed to drift. Repetition interrupts that drift. Once repetition becomes familiar, the individual becomes capable of holding higher standards. Only then does discipline evolve into identity. This is why Stoicism does not glorify dramatic change. It reinforces daily refinement. Each repetition is a quiet vote for the person you are becoming. Every time you act in alignment with your principles, you reinforce self-trust. Every time you choose structure over impulse, you strengthen your internal authority. Eventually, discipline stops requiring negotiation. It becomes instinct. Modern culture confuses inspiration with transformation. People want a moment to change them. The Stoic builds a system that changes them. The decisive breakthrough is not passion, it is consistency. Passion fades, repetition persists, passion excites, repetition reshapes. At first, discipline is a deliberate act. You must choose it against resistance. You must interrupt habit. You must guide yourself back to the standard you claim to value. This stage requires conscious effort. You are teaching the mind that comfort is no longer the authority. As repetition takes root, the internal narrative shifts. You stop arguing with yourself. You stop negotiating with laziness. You stop requiring emotional reward to continue. You begin to act because the action is aligned with who you are becoming. Identity begins to replace discipline. When discipline becomes identity, the standard tightens naturally. You no longer ask whether you feel like acting. You simply act. You no longer delay because of mood. You execute because it is your nature to execute. This is the evolution the Stoics aimed for, effort becoming embodiment. Seneca wrote that the path is difficult for those who hesitate. Once hesitation is removed, difficulty loses its weight. The mind no longer treats effort as a burden. It treats it as duty. Duty stabilizes you. Discipline becomes the spine of your character. The modern fixation on motivation keeps people unstable. They wait to feel ready. The Stoic does not wait. They begin. Readiness is built in movement, not found in thought. Each time you begin without enthusiasm, you reinforce sovereignty over impulse. This is how identity crystallizes. Progressive tightening also means holding yourself accountable with clarity. There is no indulgence in soft excuses. There is no negotiation with inconsistency. When you deviate, you correct. When you slip, you return. When you drift, you realign. Correction replaces collapse. This is where emotional detachment supports discipline. If you are not attached to external validation, you do not require encouragement to maintain your standard. You can sustain effort in silence because your standard does not depend on applause. That independence creates durability. The more you practice this tightening, the more self-trust grows. Self-trust is the recognition that you will not abandon yourself. It is the confidence that your action will match your principle. When you trust yourself, internal conflict dissolves. There is no argument. There is alignment. Once alignment is reached, discipline no longer feels restrictive. It becomes a form of self-respect. It is the way you honor your own potential. It is the visible proof of who you are becoming. This is the stage where a Stoic becomes unshakable. They are no longer held in place by environment, approval, or momentum. They move because structure has become identity. Warrior toughness introduces the dimension of resilience as force, not softness. Stoic endurance is not passive acceptance. It is fortified strength. It is the willingness to hold the line when comfort invites collapse. It is the refusal to surrender to emotional fatigue. It is the posture of a person who understands that discomfort. A Stoic trained through toughness does not fear pressure. Pressure becomes neutral. It is merely weight to be carried. When the mind ceases to interpret discomfort as threat, resilience becomes instinctive. The individual becomes someone who can suffer difficulty without collapsing, who can remain disciplined under strain, and who can stay aligned with principle even when outcomes remain distant. This is the stage where strength begins to mature into presence. People can sense when someone does not fold under discomfort. It is visible in posture. It is visible in composure. It is visible in the absence of panic. This quiet power is a natural consequence of fortitude. Resilience also rewires how you interpret obstacles. The average person sees interruption. The Stoic sees resistance training. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the impediment to action advances action. The obstacle becomes the way forward. This is not metaphor. It is psychological architecture. The very thing that once discouraged you becomes material for your refinement. At this level, accountability deepens. You stop asking why difficulty appears and start asking how you will rise through it. You recognize that hardship is not a barrier, but a sharpening mechanism. Each test confirms your capacity. Each challenge creates more evidence that you can carry yourself. Warrior-grade Stoicism rejects fragility. It rejects the soft belief that comfort is a right. It rejects the expectation that life must feel smooth to be meaningful. Meaning is earned through resistance. Strength is developed under weight. A person who understands this no longer negotiates with struggle. The next evolution beyond resilience is internal authority. The person who can withstand pressure can also command themselves. They do not need external instruction to hold their standard. They no longer rely on emotional momentum. They operate from self-command. This is where a Stoic begins to carry presence instead of seeking permission. Internal authority is the psychological shift from surviving life to governing it. You stop reacting and begin steering. You no longer treat your mind as something that drags you. You treat it as something you direct. You become the one who calls your mind to order instead of letting it drift. This is leadership of the self. Stoicism places personal sovereignty above comfort because sovereignty is the foundation of freedom. A person who governs their appetites is stronger than a person who conquers territory. A person who governs their attention is more formidable than someone who commands followers. Self-command is not loud. It does not need display. The individual simply moves with a kind of certainty that cannot be imitated. Certainty does not come from confidence. It comes from proof. The proof is discipline. The proof is consistency. The proof is the ability to continue without audience. Once internal authority is developed, you no longer chase alignment from others. You create it within yourself. Your standard governs your choices. Your conduct validates your future. Your direction is not influenced by applause or neglect. You move from intention rather than expectation. Seneca taught that the person who is master of themselves is never a servant to the world. This is the heart of Stoic self-focus. You become someone who cannot be pulled off center because your foundation is internal. The world loses leverage over you. When internal authority matures, you begin to carry a different relationship with adversity. You stop asking when the difficulty will pass and start asking what it demands of you. Adversity becomes material for mastery rather than interruption of your peace. Your identity is now forged from within instead of shaped by circumstance. Hybrid presence blends stillness with decisiveness. The Stoic does not seek to dominate the external world, yet he is immovable within it. His default state is composed containment. His secondary state is sharpened command when principle, boundary, or duty requires force. This gives his presence gravity. People feel it without theatrics. Quiet power is the foundation. Commanding power is the extension. The Stoic stands firm in silence until action is required. Then he acts without hesitation, without emotional spill, and without need for validation. This dual capacity is what gives Stoic presence its weight. Others can sense that you are governed by an internal law rather than external persuasion. When a person reaches this stage, self-respect becomes visible in conduct. They move with a measured pace. They speak with precision. They do not rush to defend themselves or justify their direction. They do not attempt to convert others to their worldview. They allow their character to communicate what words no longer need to explain. This hybrid presence also reshapes how the world responds to you. People instinctively trust someone who does not beg for validation. They sense groundedness. They sense finality in your decisions. They sense that you are not waiting for approval to proceed. This creates influence without display. Epictetus taught that true authority is obedience to one's highest nature. Once that obedience is stable, external resistance becomes manageable. Disagreement does not intimidate you. Delay does not weaken you. Doubt from others does not infect your direction. You move from conviction rather than consensus. At this stage, focus deepens into command. You no longer merely resist distraction. You are untouched by it. You no longer push yourself to act. You are compelled by inner law. You no longer look outward for momentum. You generate it. This is psychological sovereignty. Psychological sovereignty is the culmination of self-focus. It is the mental state in which your choices are governed by standards rather than moods. You hold yourself accountable through adherence to principle rather than fear of consequence. You live as your own overseer. This is where the Stoic breaks from the average path entirely. Most people live in reaction. They react to environment, to reputation, to emotion, to opinion, to neglect, to praise, to being seen or unseen. The Stoic's authority removes the reactive posture. He lives by deliberate authorship. Presence without inner authority is performance. Inner authority without presence is incomplete. Hybrid power is the synthesis. Mastery that can remain quiet or become forceful depending on circumstance. Once this capacity is built, the individual becomes strategically selective. They no longer engage where energy is wasted. They no longer argue where truth is self-evident. They no longer participate in emotional theater because their time is not owned by chaos. They have the discipline to remain still and the strength to become decisive. The next evolution is sovereignty in identity, the condition where focus on yourself is no longer a strategy, but a default way of being. At this level, external noise cannot redirect you because your compass is internal, not borrowed. High-order Stoic mastery does not reject humanity. It refines it. This stage is not isolation from life, but clarity within life. You remain capable of connection, but you are no longer sustained by it. You can walk beside others without leaning on them. You can care without collapsing. You can give without depletion. You operate from fullness, not hunger. This is what separates sovereignty from detachment for its own sake. The goal is not to become unreachable. The goal is to become unshakable. The mind is no longer reactive because it is fully governed. The emotions no longer dictate conduct because character has become the driver. You do not close yourself off from the world. You simply no longer depend on it to feel grounded. A sovereign mind is not cold, it is composed. It does not withdraw out of fear. It remains independent out of strength. When you reach this level, Stillness is not escape, it is command. You can remain calm because your stability is self-contained. You no longer need the environment to cooperate in order to remain steady. The Stoics called this state eudaimonia, a life directed by excellence of character. It is not pleasure-based, it is not reputation-based, it is not approval-based. It is a life governed by alignment between thought, action, and principle. From this posture, peace becomes a discipline rather than a mood. You do not hope for stable conditions. You create stable conditions within yourself. The external world loses the ability to pull you out of order because your reference point is rooted inward. When you reach sovereignty of mind, your standards no longer bend to circumstance. You do what is required whether or not it is praised, noticed, rewarded, or supported. You keep your word to yourself without negotiation. You live as an executor of duty rather than a seeker of comfort. This level of mastery also brings clarity about relationships and influence. You no longer chase acceptance because you are no longer incomplete without it. You no longer fear exclusion because your identity is self-authored. You no longer need to prove your value because your conduct reveals it. You become whole. Seneca wrote that the wise man is content with himself, yet ready for friendship. This is the essence of high-order Stoic independence. You are open, but not needy. You are present, but not dependent. You can connect without losing yourself. You can walk alone without feeling abandoned. At this point, self-focus transforms from a discipline into a way of existence. It is no longer a practice you engage in. It is the natural rhythm of your identity. You carry yourself with command because you no longer outsource your worth. The mind becomes a fortress that moves with you, not a shelter you must return to. A sovereign person does not increase their value by being seen. Their value exists whether or not the world watches. Recognition becomes optional. Approval becomes irrelevant. Their life is measured internally by whether they upheld duty, preserved integrity, and lived in accordance with disciplined reason. This is the psychological arrival point of the Stoic path, a self-owned life. A life where you are no longer formed by external reaction. A life where focus on yourself has produced a foundation no one can take from you. Psychological immunity expressed as impenetrable strength means the mind cannot be breached by opinion, rejection, dismissal, or doubt. Attacks do not penetrate because there is no internal wound for them to hook into. Criticism does not destabilize you because your identity is not stored outside of you. Neglect does not weaken you because you do not draw energy from others. You have become self-sourced. This is the Stoic condition of being untouchable, not invulnerable in the body, but invulnerable in the mind. An insult cannot reach the core. A dismissal cannot revoke your direction. A misjudgment cannot rewrite your nature. The world can react, but it cannot define. The fortress is sealed from within. Many people crumble under pressure because they are still seeking external confirmation that they are allowed to stand tall. When that confirmation is absent, they fold. Psychological immunity removes this dependency. You stand because you trained yourself to. You hold your standard because you chose it. You persist because your identity is not contingent on response. Seneca wrote that no person has the power to harm the wise because the wise place nothing of value outside their own command. This is the essence of impenetrability. The world can touch circumstance, but not sovereignty. It can affect conditions, but not character. You remain intact. This level of resilience creates a different relationship with adversity. What once felt like threat now feels like verification. Difficulty confirms strength. Disagreement confirms independence. Resistance confirms forward motion. The mind no longer fears hardship because it has proven its capacity to withstand it. At this stage, external turbulence does not register as personal. You do not interpret the reactions of others as commentary on your worth. You do not internalize their perception or emotion. You do not absorb their instability. You carry your own atmosphere. The warrior Stoic does not compete with the world. He stands unmoved by it. People feel this as gravity. It is not performance. It is earned solidity. The person with psychological immunity does not need to posture strength because the strength is real. There is no hollowness to protect. There is no weakness to conceal. The average mind reacts because it is still searching for reinforcement. The trained mind remains composed because it no longer needs what others withhold. Independence is complete when the outside world can no longer revoke your steadiness. Strategic boundaries are the natural extension of sovereignty. You do not defend your worth. You do not negotiate your standard. You do not argue for space. You simply decide where your energy is permitted to go. Silence is the default boundary. Assertion is the deliberate one. This preserves strength because it prevents unnecessary expenditure of attention. A sovereign person does not rush to confront or correct. They conserve force until force is required. If a situation demands clarity, they deliver it without hesitation and without emotional theatrics. If a situation does not merit engagement, they withdraw their presence and their attention. This is tactical restraint. This approach is rooted in mastery of reaction. The immature mind responds to everything. The sovereign mind responds only to what aligns with duty or principle. Everything else passes without friction. The world loses its leverage because your participation is now voluntary, not impulsive. When strategic boundaries are present, relationships become cleaner. You stop over-explaining yourself. You stop trying to convert people to your values. You stop granting access to those who have not earned it. You do not chase clarity from others. You supply clarity through conduct. Epictetus taught that a disciplined man sets his own terms of engagement. He does not enter every conflict simply because he has been provoked. Composure is his first weapon. Principle is his second. Action is his third. This hierarchy ensures that strength is expressed with intention, not waste. This is how a Stoic becomes difficult to manipulate. If silence is your default boundary, no one can provoke you into reaction. If assertiveness is reserved for principle, no one can pressure you into emotional theater. You become predictable only in discipline, not in vulnerability. Such presence alters how others behave around you. People instinctively moderate themselves in the presence of someone who cannot be rattled. They sense structure. They sense finality. They sense that your respect cannot be bargained for, and your focus cannot be lured into distraction. Influence becomes passive rather than performative. This is the turning point where focus on yourself becomes visible through restraint rather than display. You do not demonstrate power, you carry it. You do not seek to be understood, you embody understanding. You do not demand respect, you live in a way that makes disrespect ineffective. Strategic boundaries preserve energy for what is worthy of endurance. They keep your discipline intact and your mind uncluttered. You no longer bleed strength through emotional participation in triviality. Your life becomes structured around direction rather than reaction. When sovereignty matures into stability, the reward is inner peace, not the fragile peace that depends on quiet conditions, but the unshakable peace that persists even in disruption. This is the deepest outcome of Stoic self-mastery, becoming a person who cannot be internally displaced by external turbulence. Inner peace is not relief from difficulty, it is steadiness within difficulty. It is the absence of inner conflict. The mind is no longer at war with itself because it has been trained into alignment. Desire and duty no longer pull in opposite directions. Impulse no longer interrupts discipline. Noise no longer fractures attention. The world remains chaotic, but you do not carry the chaos inside. You move through life with a kind of grounded certainty that does not need display. Peace becomes posture. It becomes the background atmosphere of your inner world. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. When your thoughts are disciplined, your inner world becomes ordered. When your inner world is ordered, you cannot be shaken. This is why the Stoic does not chase calm. He manufactures it through self-command. A peaceful person is powerful because they cannot be baited, rattled, or pulled off course. Their reaction is not owned by circumstance. Their attention is not hostage to provocation. Their state is not rented to the behavior of others. This is psychological freedom. Tranquility also sharpens judgment. A disturbed mind makes frantic choices. A sovereign mind makes precise ones. You can see people clearly because nothing in you is clouded by hidden insecurity. You navigate reality without projecting need into it. High-order Stoic peace is active stability. It does not withdraw from life to feel safe. It stands inside life and remains steady. It is a stillness that has been earned through trial, discipline, and detachment. The peace is credible because it has been tested. From here, the world becomes easier to carry, not because the world changed, but because your posture toward it did. Burden does not feel heavy to someone who is trained under heavier loads. Doubt does not frighten someone who is anchored in discipline. Loneliness does not destabilize someone who is self-sufficient. This is the essence of true self-focus, to build such inner structure that nothing external can fracture your center. The reward is not applause or recognition. The reward is peace that cannot be revoked by circumstance. An integrated conclusion means peace is not the end of the path, but the ground from which disciplined living continues. The Stoic does not reach tranquility and stop. He reaches tranquility and becomes more capable of right action. Peace becomes fuel for precision. Stability becomes a platform for decisive execution. This is where philosophy returns to conduct. The person who has mastered himself moves through life without inner distortion. His choices are clean because they are not made from hunger, insecurity, performance, or panic. They are made from alignment. He acts from strength, not from need. Inner peace is now the default operating state, but duty remains active. You do not withdraw from the world once you are stable. You engage it more effectively because nothing in you is leaking energy into fear, validation seeking, or emotional volatility. A sovereign mind does not rush because nothing threatens its footing. It does not stall because hesitation no longer governs action. It does not collapse because adversity no longer signals danger to the self. This creates a disciplined, composed way of living that others experience as presence. This is how the Stoic moves. Steady, deliberate, unbent by noise, immune to coercion, and anchored in purpose. His life becomes quiet evidence of self-command. Peace is the condition. Duty is the expression. From here, the world cannot shrink you. Recognition cannot inflate you. Neglect cannot diminish you. You exist on your own terms, governed by your own standard. That is the meaning of nobody cares. Focus on yourself, not detachment from humanity, but mastery of self, so that you no longer beg the world for strength you are fully capable of generating. An ascendant close means the posture rises rather than settles. The mind does not collapse into stillness, it expands into command. The peace you now carry becomes elevation. You move through the world with the steadiness of someone who has mastered the self and no longer answers to weakness. The stillness has height, the calm has force. At this level, the Stoic is not merely stable, he is formidable. There is an upward weight to his composure, the sense that he is no longer trying to become anything. He already is. The path is no longer about repair, it is about expression. The strength has already been earned. Now it is lived. This is where self-focus transforms into personal dominion. You are not following life anymore. You are shaping it. You are not surviving conditions. You are structuring them. You are not hoping to be understood. You are building a life that requires no explanation. You stand as your own evidence. When a person reaches this state, the world adjusts around them. People instinctively recognize hierarchy of discipline. They feel the gravity of someone who does not outsource identity, mood, or direction. Presence becomes influence without assertion. The ascendant posture also removes fear of solitude. You are not sustained by companionship, which means you can choose it freely. You are not afraid of being unseen, which means you can build without hesitation. You are not shaken by delay, which means you outlast those who seek momentum through applause. This is the height of nobody cares. Focus on yourself. The point at which external recognition becomes irrelevant, because your life is now rooted in internal infrastructure. You have become the source. You fuel your own motion. You carry your own certainty. Such a person does not walk into the world hoping to be received. He walks into the world already prepared to stand. That is the power of the ascendant Stoic. He is not above others, but he is no longer beneath circumstance. From here, the manuscript will shift into the outward expression of this state. How a sovereign and ascendant mind lives, decides, builds, and continues forward with disciplined momentum. Hybrid expression will allow the philosophy to breathe through posture, while still giving the listener a graspable pattern of living. The sovereignty you have built internally now becomes visible through conduct. The world does not see your discipline in your intention, it sees it in your way of moving. A sovereign Stoic starts the day by establishing command over his state before the world interferes. The morning is not a scramble, it is a calibration. He does not reach for distraction, he reaches for alignment. His first action is governance, not escape. This sets the tone. The inner world leads, the outer world follows. Throughout the day, his presence is measured. He wastes no motion, he wastes no speech. He protects attention the way others protect possessions. Conversation is not noise but selection. He does not trade energy for approval. He trades energy only for progress. He does not announce his goals. He carries them. He does not advertise growth. He embodies it. His standard is visible in silence, long before it is visible in outcome. People feel his direction even when they do not know its details. In challenge, he does not panic. Panic is the reflex of the ungoverned mind. His reflex is composure. His instinct is analysis. His action is proportioned, never frantic. He does not collapse under uncertainty. He strengthens under it. When he interacts with others, he does not posture. He does not chase significance. He is not pulled toward attention because he no longer needs to be seen. Influence arises naturally where ego is absent and strength is stable. This way of living turns peace into power. The world cannot disturb what it does not control, and it cannot control what it does not supply. You become ungovernable by opinion and unmoved by neglect. Only when necessary does assertive presence surface. This is the moment when restraint shifts into precision, when a line must be drawn, when a principle must be preserved, when a direction must be enforced. The action is swift, clean, and final. There is no debate because the standard is not up for negotiation. The sovereign Stoic does not live by reaction. He lives by orientation, an internal compass built from discipline and verified through consistency. Others may drift, he does not. The ground he stands on is the one he built within himself. This is how mastery translates into motion: presence without performance, command without aggression, stillness without passivity, and strength without noise. In the highest form of Stoic mastery, strength does not settle, it rises. The mind does not merely become calm, it becomes elevated. Peace turns into propulsion, stillness becomes power held in motion. When a person is no longer owned by doubt, validation, or expectation, their direction becomes inevitable. Sovereignty matures into trajectory. The disciplined person does not simply endure life. He advances through it with clarity. His composure sharpens his momentum. His peace becomes a source of force rather than a place of retreat. Self-focus becomes forward drive, steady, grounded, and unstoppable. Controlled ascent is the posture of someone who no longer rushes because he no longer doubts. His direction is set. His pace is governed by intention rather than impulse. He moves with a steady elevation that does not require spectacle. What he builds grows quietly, yet nothing can prevent its maturation. His progress is not frantic, it is inevitable. This is why a Stoic does not seek urgency. Urgency is a symptom of inner instability. A sovereign mind does not sprint to prove itself or grasp for milestones to feel secure. Advancement comes through constancy. He rises the way a mountain forms, not by announcement, but by weight, depth, and permanence. The world tends to reward noise, but only for a moment. It rewards spectacle, but never with stability. The Stoic chooses the opposite model: deep foundation before visible structure. He builds the root before the canopy. Others chase acceleration. He builds inevitability. This is the power of controlled ascent, growth that cannot be shaken loose by neglect, delay, or resistance. It does not depend on being fueled from the outside. It is powered from within. His forward movement is not reaction, it is continuation. When a person reaches this level, his life stops being a pursuit and becomes a progression. He does not force outcomes. He aligns himself so outcomes unfold. He does not wait to be carried. He carries himself. Dense power with a rising tone means the strength is both grounded and ascending. It is the quiet certainty of someone who has already forged themselves, combined with the upward pull of someone who is still becoming more. There is no strain in this growth. It is the natural continuation of mastery. At this stage, the Stoic no longer measures life by circumstance, opinion, or momentum. Life is measured by alignment with principle and consistency of action. The inner world is ordered, so the outer world cannot disorganize him. The ground beneath him is built from standards, not validation. That is why he does not fall. He rises without spectacle because nothing in him is divided anymore. His will is not scattered by insecurity. His time is not diluted by comparison. His strength is not negotiated through need. He does not seek reinforcement because he has already become reinforcement for himself. The highest understanding of nobody cares is liberation combined with power. You are free because no one is watching you closely enough to confine your path. You are unstoppable because no one is responsible for limiting or fueling your ascent. The absence of external investment becomes the space in which inner strength expands. When no one is watching, you are unhindered. When no one is carrying you, you become capable of carrying yourself. When no one is invested in your outcome, you become free to engineer it without interference. Indifference becomes a shield against distraction. Solitude becomes a training ground for inevitability. This is the final shift, realizing that the world's lack of attention is not abandonment. It is permission. Permission to build without noise. Permission to grow without distortion. Permission to become someone forged by principle rather than audience. With immediate elevation, the posture rises now, not later. The sovereign mind does not wait for a final arc to embody its strength. The ascent is already active. The presence is already higher than the noise around it. From this point forward, the tone carries the energy of a person who is not building confidence. He is living from it. This is the state in which forward motion is no longer effort. It is identity. The individual does not try to rise. He embodies rising. He does not perform strength. He radiates it. He does not seek promise. He becomes proof. When mastery becomes visible to others, it is perceived as unshakable presence. People do not see the internal architecture, but they feel the solidity. Respect arises not from performance or demand, but from posture, from the consistency of a person who does not fold. The sovereign Stoic does not chase recognition, yet recognition forms around him because stability is a rare force in the modern world. Others instinctively adjust their tone around someone who is not moved by approval or threatened by indifference. They sense the difference between composure that is acted and composure that is earned. They may not know the depth of your inner discipline, but they know they are standing in front of someone who does not fracture. Respect becomes the natural response to someone who has mastered himself. The relationship with the future becomes a fusion of readiness, inevitability, and authorship. The Stoic does not fear what is ahead, because he is already prepared to meet it. He does not wait for outcomes, because his discipline guarantees movement toward them. He does not chase possibility, because he is actively constructing it through who he is becoming. The future is not something he hopes for. It is something he steps into, calmly, intentionally, without rush and without hesitation. His preparation makes him ready. His consistency makes him inevitable. His sovereignty makes him the architect rather than the recipient of his fate. Strength in its final form is both unyielding and alive. It carries the certainty of forged iron and the forward pull of conviction. There is no softness in its posture and no permission in its movement. It does not bend to opinion or wait for approval. It stands rooted in principle while continuing to rise through will. The ascent now carries momentum. The posture no longer settles into weight. It moves with sharpened drive. Strength is no longer something held. It is something directed. The sovereign mind does not wait for alignment from the world. It advances with its own force. Each step forward is confirmation, not negotiation. He becomes unstoppable in every axis, inwardly and outwardly. The mind no longer fractures, so nothing can break him from within. The motion no longer hesitates, so nothing can block him from without. There is no foothold for doubt, and no leverage for resistance. The world has no handle on a person who is both self-governed and forward-moving. His inner stance becomes a fusion of all three. He is unbothered because nothing external can agitate a mind that governs itself. He is unmovable because his direction is chosen from principle rather than reaction. And he is unbound because no expectation, opinion, or circumstance has the power to contain him. He does not bend to pressure, and he does not shrink to fit the limits of others. He moves through life as someone who is already free. Ascendant authority carries upward movement in every line. The strength does not sit still, it rises. The presence does not merely exist, it expands. This is the point at which mastery becomes expression. The person no longer reaches for power. He is power in motion. Strength continues to rise in stacked waves. Each elevation builds upon the last. There is no plateau, there is only upward movement. Mastery becomes a series of ascents, not a destination. Every layer of discipline becomes a platform for greater command. With each rise, weakness loses its claim on you. With each rise, your inner world gains more weight. With each rise, the outer world loses its power to shape you. The point of sovereignty is not to watch strength from a distance, but to step into it until it becomes your way of breathing. At first you see the one who stands unbothered, unmovable, unbound. Then you begin to recognize the same posture forming in yourself. The shift is not dramatic. It is a quiet transfer of authority, from doubt to discipline, from hesitation to certainty, from hoping to becoming. The shift happens quietly at first. You begin to move with the awareness that you are no longer seeking ground. You are standing on it. You no longer reach outward for steadiness because steadiness now comes from within. You stop waiting for alignment and begin acting from alignment. What once felt like aspiration settles into identity. You are not trying to become grounded. You are becoming the one who already is. The ascent sharpens first, then expands. It begins with clarity, stripped of ornament, stripped of hesitation, and then it opens into momentum. Strength compresses before it rises. The posture settles inward before it lifts outward. You feel the tightening before the elevation. You feel the grounding before the climb. This is how identity becomes height, anchored first, ascending next. From here, the ascent carries fire, not noise, not display, but a burning interior certainty, the kind that does not waver and does not negotiate with doubt. This is the phase where conviction becomes fuel. Movement is no longer something you initiate. It is something that pours out of you because there is nothing left inside that resists it. Conviction becomes both engine and direction. It is not only something held inside, it is something that shapes the way you walk, choose, and advance. Others do not need to be told you are certain. They can feel it in the way you move. Momentum stops being effort. It becomes expression. The inner fire turns outward as forward motion, and your life begins to reflect the strength you have built within. You feel the last barrier fall away as strength becomes your nature. There is no longer a gap between who you intend to be and who you are. The discipline you once practiced has turned into the ground you stand on. What once required effort now feels like instinct. You do not reach for stability, you move from it. The mind settles into a unified state of certainty, power, and authority. You do not wonder whether you can stand. You know it. You do not search for direction. You carry it. You do not look outward for permission. You move from an inner command that is already decided. There is no debate left in you. The questions are gone. The center is fixed. Others feel it before they see it expressed. Your presence announces what your voice does not need to say. And when you act, the authority becomes unmistakable. There is no performance in it, only alignment. People sense that you are not waiting to be empowered. You already carry power into the room. The world responds because it recognizes what is already settled in you. Forward motion becomes inevitable. There is nothing behind you strong enough to pull you backward. There is nothing ahead of you capable of blocking a mind that no longer waits for permission to advance. And there is nothing within you that still doubts your direction. You move because movement is now the natural expression of who you are. You are not pushed by desperation or pulled by recognition. You are carried forward by command. Life becomes terrain you cross with steadiness, an arena you enter already prepared, and a stage you do not perform on. You move through it as someone who no longer needs to be seen to be certain. The world is not a judge of your direction, but simply the ground beneath your stride. You are not shaped by its crowd, its pace, or its expectations. You carry your own weather, your own gravity, your own command. You become the grounded point in a world that sways, the one who advances while others remain motionless, and the one who rises beyond the field they remain trapped in. The crowd lives in reaction, you live in direction. They borrow identity, you generate it. They wait for momentum, you carry it. Their world is shaped by noise, yours is shaped by command. The ascent becomes inevitable, ignited and enthroning at once, rising without resistance, powered from within, and seated in self-command. Nothing outside you grants this position, and nothing outside you can revoke it. The authority is internal, the movement is upward, and the claim over your own life is final. You now walk through the world with a different center of gravity. Nothing pulls you off course because there is no inner hook left for the world to pull. You do not brace against life, you advance through it. You do not wait for conditions, you work with what is here and shape the rest. The future no longer feels distant because you are already moving as the person capable of building it. There is a quiet fire beneath your steps. It does not flare outward for display. It drives you from within. The motion is steady, relentless, sovereign. People feel it before they understand it. They sense a person who does not need approval to stand tall and does not need witnesses to continue forward. The inner conversation is different now. Doubt does not negotiate with you anymore because there is nothing left to negotiate. You do not ask, "Will I endure this?" You are already enduring it. You do not ask, "Can I rise through this?" You are already rising. Movement is not a decision. It is the natural continuation of who you have become. This is why nobody caring no longer stings. It strengthens. It leaves you unobserved while you build. It gives you empty space in which to grow without interference. It frees you from theatrical effort. You are no longer performing resilience. You are resilience. From this place, confidence is no longer a pursuit. It is the atmosphere you walk in. You are not trying to convince yourself anymore. You are acting from what you already know you are capable of. Progress is not something you hope for. It is something you execute. Discipline is not something you carry as weight. It is something that carries you. You have crossed the threshold where pressure no longer feels personal. Challenge is no longer interruption. Resistance is no longer a threat. Everything becomes training material. Everything becomes sharpening ground. The world is no longer an obstacle to brace against. It is a structure through which you confirm your own strength. Others notice the shift even when they do not have language for it. They feel the steadiness, the unreactive energy, the quiet force. You do not need to say you have changed. Your presence communicates it before words arrive. Respect forms because certainty is unmistakable when it is real. You now walk as someone who no longer waits to be chosen. You choose yourself in every direction you move. You no longer try to earn a place in the world. You build the ground you stand on. You do not follow momentum. You generate it. You advance with force now, not aggression, but undeniable momentum. You move like someone who no longer doubts the ground beneath his feet. Each step carries finality. Each choice carries weight. You are no longer building belief. You are carrying out what belief has already forged. There is nothing hesitant in your posture. There is nothing half-claimed in your direction. You are no longer proving strength. You are applying it. The world does not get to decide where you stop. The world does not get to dictate where you level off. Your ceiling no longer exists anywhere outside your own discipline. This is what it means to become untouchable. There is no remaining place for the world to reach inside you and weaken your course. There is nothing left to extract, no weakness left to hook into, no doubt left to slow your movement. You do not need to be reassured, recalibrated, or reminded of who you are. It is already rooted. From here, you do not chase momentum. You create it by living in alignment with your highest standard. You do not wait for support. You walk as support. You do not look outward for direction. You generate it. This is the shift from surviving life to commanding it. The posture is not loud. It is decisive. And this is where nobody cares, focus on yourself, completes its meaning. It is not cynicism. It is coronation. When no one carries you, you become the one capable of carrying yourself farther than anyone expected. When no one builds you, you become the architect of a life that cannot be dismantled by neglect. The clothes must rise into you and then move through you. It must leave you taller and moving forward at the same time, elevated in who you are, activated in what you now do. The strength is no longer theory, preparation, or training ground. It becomes execution. It becomes posture. It becomes the way you carry your life into the world. You now stand as the one who no longer waits for alignment, because alignment lives in you. You do not pause to be understood, because your direction is self-issued. You do not measure your progress through recognition, because the engine of your growth is internal law. You have become the source of your own momentum, a life moving by command rather than permission. This is where others begin to feel the separation. Not because you pulled away from them, but because you rose beyond the terms that kept you ordinary. They still look outward. You now move from within. They still require validation. You no longer require witnesses. The distance is not vertical ego. It is vertical growth. The path is no longer about improvement. It is about expression. You are not becoming stronger. You are carrying out the strength you have already earned. Every step forward is a declaration of sovereignty without needing a word. And now the seal. You rise. You carry yourself. You do not come down. And from this height, you begin to live as one who never relinquishes their summit.